Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's actually been a while since I've given an update on my out-of-state rental property down in Indianapolis, Indiana. I currently live in Chicago, Illinois, and I guess that's a good thing that I haven't had to do an update since there hasn't been a whole lot of trouble. But there have been a few things here and there that are worth noting, and I'll get into those in this video. There are a lot of things to pay attention to in running a property, and there are a lot of areas that could potentially drain your cash flow that you should definitely look out for. Now, real estate is often pitched as this super easy process. You buy the house, you rent it out, you buy the building, whatever it is, and there is some truth to that. It is a simple business model. You're buying space and renting it out. Yes, that is true, but there are some nuances to pay attention to. A lot of those nuances will depend on the type of property you're working with and thus the type of tenant, whether it be a single-family home, a multi-unit, a commercial property that might be to a business tenant. There are different risks and different things to pay attention to with each type of property. Now, as for my rental, the single-family home in Indianapolis, I recently got news that the fridge went out in the unit. This is the fridge that came with the property, and it was actually built in 1999, so the fact that it even made it this long, I guess, is pretty impressive. But now that means I have to fork over something like $700 to replace the fridge, and that's no fun, seeing as though the rent on the unit is about $1,000 right now. And then from that $1,000, I still have to pay my manager about 10% of the rent roll. I still have to save up for CapEx, which is the really important part here. And then I got taxes and insurance, and there's no debt on the property at the moment, as this is my sort of baseline foundation layer to my portfolio. And also because it's been pretty hard to get financing on this property anyways, since it's worth about $100,000. And generally, lenders will not lend on rental properties below $100,000 unless you're going to fork over big fees or pay really high interest rates. It's pretty hard. Not that it's impossible, but I haven't been able to find one to this point, and I just don't think it's worth the hassle at this time. But even with no debt on the property, the $700 bill for the fridge is going to wipe out my cash flow for a month, essentially. And if I had a hefty debt payment on the property, that would probably mean I'd be at a negative cash flow in the month if I was doing that. And some months ago, the glass shower door in the master bathroom, I guess, fell off the hinge or something and shattered, so that needed to be replaced. Now, the tenant told me that it fell off the hinge on its own, and I definitely doubt that, but I definitely can't prove it otherwise, and I just want to make sure that this tenant is taken care of so that they stay for the long term, so I went ahead and replaced that too. Again, that was a couple months ago. And I forget how much it cost exactly to fix, but it was something like a couple $100, so that ate into that month's cash flow. But I keep saying that it canceled out cash flow, and that's not really what happened, either with the shower door situation, or with the fridge, or with anything else for that matter. What it actually came out of was reserves. Every single month, I allocate at least 10% of the rent towards my reserve pile for capital expenditures specifically. And capital expenditures refers to all those maintenance items that you're going to have to go through, whether it be replacing appliances, fixing problems with the roof, fixing problems with the property in general. These things are going to pop up as the property is being used, because people using the property, it's going to wear it out. And if the tenant eventually moves and maybe the flooring needs to be replaced or it needs a new paint job or whatever, that's all going to be towards capital expenditures. But some of these items can be pretty expensive, even in the thousands of dollars. And if you're going paycheck to paycheck on the property, you're using all the cash flow for yourself and you're using all the rent too, you're not saving anything while you're going to be in for a rude awakening when one of those things pops up. Really what I'm doing is I'm prepaying for those expenses by putting them into a reserve account and making sure that they are ready to go for when those things do arise, because they will arise. That is the fact of the matter. No property is indestructible, and while having a newer property can certainly help with reducing some of those capital expenditures, at least in the short term, they still eventually will wear out. There's a chance that the tenant might break something, or it might be poorly constructed, or you might simply have overlooked something, but someone's going to have to pay for it, and the owner is going to be that person. So when you're running the numbers on a property, understand that these expenses are going to pop up, and that you should be factoring them into your calculations so you don't overestimate the amount that it's actually going to be returning to you. You might think you're making a 15% cash and cash return when you run the numbers yourself, but then you realize you forgot to include a capital expenditures account or some other maintenance account that you're going to need to maintain so that you can maintain the property when issues pop up. And the amount you set aside will depend on the property itself. Like I said, a newer property might need less in maintenance, so you might be able to make that reserve account a little bit smaller than with maybe an older property or something that looks like it's going to be needing repairs in the near future. You might bump up that capital expenditures account. But under no circumstances should you assume that a property is never going to need maintenance, because it will, even if it's not being used. Non-use can be a thing that affects the property since it's still outside, affected by the elements, or at least the exterior is. And sometimes when things aren't used, pipes can clog up or things can corrode. These things have finite lives. Even the things that were really well built 100 years ago, if it's been 100 years, there's no guarantees that it's going to go another 100 years or indefinitely. These things do need repairs, and you can never really tell what's going to need repairs until the things actually break or give out, and then you're going to have to foot that bill to fix it. Having reserves ready to go and continually adding to them as you go forward is really critical for reducing risk in investing in rental properties, and also for reducing headaches, since if I had to come up with the $700 on my own, it might sting a lot more if I hadn't already saved for it. But because I saved for it, it doesn't really affect anything. All the cash flow metrics are going to be the same since I'm still just adding to that same reserve account. Again, the reserve account is like a prepaid expense account. I'm not going to pull from that. That is just for capital expenditures just like this. I'm not living off of the capital expenditures savings. And on a related note, beyond capital expenditures, you're going to want to have vacancy reserves ready to go too, since the property is not always going to be occupied most likely. Maybe you'll get a long-term tenant in there who stays for many years and you don't have to deal with vacancy, but more often than not, tenants are going to move out at least after a couple years, maybe even quicker than that. So you got to be ready to maybe take on a month where you have no tenant and no rent coming in, but you're still going to have all your expenses to pay. And if you have a big debt payment on the property, you might want to make that vacancy savings or expense account a lot bigger because your expenses are also bigger. So you want to make it equivalent to what your expenses actually would be for whatever amount of time makes you comfortable. Some people might save up just a couple months of vacancy expenses to make sure that they can cover the expenses for a couple months in the event that the tenant stops paying rent, or if the tenant simply moves out and you have to re-rent it and it might take some time. But others might save up many months or even over a year's worth of vacancy expenses just in case, so you're always covered. You're not really going to be risking foreclosure since you have that cash ready to go to pay many of the expenses. Of course, there's some risk to holding that amount of cash uninvested, but the point is it does depend on your risk tolerance, but you should have something there in any event. But otherwise, things are going pretty smoothly with this property, and we're approaching 1 year of owning this thing by the end of July, so that'll be really cool to reach that milestone. And we're looking to invest in another property pretty soon, whether that be here in Chicago for a house hack type deal or just a primary residence so we can rent out my current primary residence, or it could be another property in Indianapolis, but that's the general focus. We're looking at Chicago or Indy, and we could do other markets potentially, but I haven't really looked in other markets. But otherwise, that's all I've got for today. So if you like this video, please like it since that would help the channel out a lot. And if you like this sort of content about real estate and investing and other content like that, then definitely have a look around the channel. And if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. And check out all the affiliate links in the description below. But until next time, take care.